Really, really appreciate it, and for chairing this event tonight. We're really grateful.
Yeah,
and
you haven't lost your accent, Colin.
Oh, I know, like, yeah, well, I'll be watching Liverpool later, so yeah.
And I think I just see, just before I start, I think I see someone from the Bahamas, Faith Wall. I think I see your name.
Hopefully.
You have to unmute.
Are you on mute? Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How is everyone?
We're all good. We're all good. We're not as sunny as you are in the Bahamas, but we're coping.
No. We're disappointed now. We were expecting a cold front and it isn't here yet.
You're disappointed because you were expecting a cold front. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll try to get our heads around that.
I'm here. I'm silent, but I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for joining us, Faye.
Okay.
Okay, so I think, David, am I allowed to start?
You are indeed, yes. By all
Thank
means,
you.
of course.
David is the controller and arbiter of all things Lunar Society, you see, everyone. So we dare not start without his permission. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And I think this is the first in our future series for the Lunar Society events for the year. It's just, I mean, 2020, whew, where did that go? 2021, what's that going to bring? So we're certainly looking forward to it. So I'm really grateful, honored and privileged to have the panel that we have with us tonight to really talk about this very pertinent topic for our times. So just a little background in terms of the Future series. And in the time-honored tradition of the Lunar Society, we will be stimulating ideas, broadening debate, and catalyzing action around how we look at challenges for the future. We're looking at, particularly in relation to the West Midlands, we're going to be looking at transport, housing, health, changing demographics, urban living. But tonight, we're looking at education. I'm the chair of the Lunar Society, Deirdre Labassiere, and as chair, I have a few house rules before we start this meeting tonight. So first of all, the event is being recorded. So if you want to be anonymous, please just turn off your camera. You are welcome to use that mute button during the meeting, other than when you are actually speaking, of course. And that button can be found at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Now, if you want to make a point or raise a question, you can signal the chair, which is Professor Colin Diamond, or you can signal myself or David Clark that you want to speak by using the reactions button to send a thumbs up, or you can put it in the chat that you would like to speak directly to one of us. You're also, of course, welcome to show your agreement with what a speaker is saying by using what we now have as a time-honored tradition of using the hand clapping facility. The instant messaging chat feature is fantastic to allow you to ask the chair questions whilst we're going along, or to comment on something whilst someone else is speaking. Do use the hashtag Lunar Society if you're going to be speaking about us whilst this is happening online or after the event. And of course, you can tweet at LunarSoc. You can also find us on LinkedIn and on Facebook under the handle, the Lunar Society. Right, so let's get started now that I've dealt with all those bits. So as I've said, we are actually a time-honored organization. And in honoring that tradition, we are in tonight, we're taking off the rose-tinted glasses and we're having a really honest discussion around race and class in regard to disadvantaged children from white backgrounds. We're also going to be speaking about the intersectionality that brings in relation to the impact of COVID on schooling, education, and health for white children from white backgrounds, but also for children from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds as well. So we need to be thinking about this issue, of course, and the emergent evidence has shown that, where the school closures due to the pandemic, which I understand schools are not going to be reopening until probably about the 5th of March, we need to be looking at widening achievement gaps between poorer pupils and, of course, their more privileged peers. And recently, LSE Politics and Policy published a paper in regard to precisely that. The Education Select Committee continues to take evidence on the issue of left behind white pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds, and we need to consider how we might tackle such an ongoing issue in Birmingham and, of course, beyond. So our expert panel includes Abigail Vlahakis, Alex Hughes, and Sharon Bell. And they are chaired by Professor Colin Diamond, whom I have heard described as a diamond in name and a diamond in nature. Professor Colin Diamond is the Professor of Educational Leadership at the University of Birmingham. He's worked in the field of educational leadership for many years. He has been head of a faculty, associate head teacher, local education authority advisor, assistant director and director of education children's services. Colin has led improvements in 2 local authorities. He has taken them from government intervention to strong performance. He's also worked with the Department for Education in England as head of education advisors for academies and free schools program. He was Deputy Education Commissioner in Birmingham. He's also an Ofsted inspector. He was an associate lecturer in 3 universities before taking the chair of education leadership at the University of Birmingham. We're also joined by Abigail Vlahakis, who is Chief Executive of Millennium Point. She is a champion. She supports and encourages children and creates future generations of innovators. The Millennium Point Charitable Trust Small Grants Program, which is funded by the Millennium Point's role as a landlord and events provider, supports and encourages so many young people to develop their interests and pursue careers in STEM. Abby graduated from the University of Wales, Aberystwyth, with a master's degree in business administration and has for 20 years, and I know she doesn't look it, but she has for 20 years advised UK businesses during her time at Grant Thornton and KPMG. She has actually said, and I quote, that growing up in a South Wales mining village, she is hugely aware of the importance of creating opportunities for the next generation. She is committed to widening her reach to help secure rewarding careers in STEM for young people, especially important to the West Midlands, home to the Lunar Society. We're joined also by Alex Hughes, who is a principal at Ninestiles Academy. He was appointed principal in 2019, having previously been acting co-head of schools at Acox Green. Ninestiles, of course, is a member of Summit Learning Trust and a UNICEF accredited rights respecting school that quite rightly prides itself on actively tackling disadvantage and removing barriers to learning to ensure that all students are able to reach their potential. He was born locally, and he wrote in a blog that from the moment he walked through the door at Ninestiles 10 years ago, and this was in 2015 he wrote this blog, he's felt a warmth and compassion in the place that brings people together. He understands the multicultural melting pot that is so necessary to life being so diverse. Then, of course, we have Sharon Bell, who is Chief Executive of Services for Education. Sharon joined Birmingham-based Education and Training Charity Services for Education in 2019. And for nearly 4 years, she was Group Vice Principal at WCG, Warwickshire College Group. Sharon was also College Director for 2 of the colleges in the group. And she was previously Associate Director for the Careers and Employability Service at the University of Birmingham. So as you can see, we have an incredible panel of individuals who are bringing quite significant experience and expertise and diversity to this talk tonight. So it is my pleasure to hand you over to our much respected and honored chair for the evening, Professor Colin Diamond. Colin, I'm sorry, but you are on mute.
Right, there we go. Take two. Pause the recording. Colleagues, really good to be invited to join you all tonight. It was good to hear all those details of our presenters this evening. And looking around the room, I would say, and this reflects on the Lunar Society, we have a huge reservoir of expertise and knowledge between us all tonight. Some of you I know well, some we haven't worked together before, but let's make sure that as the event progresses, we listen to speakers and we also draw on everyone's wisdom, because we're all in this one together. So a brief personal perspective. Deirdre described sort of my career there, and I landed in Birmingham, probably in a parachute that was dropped out of a plane by Michael Gove in the middle of Trojan Horse. It was an interesting time in the city, as many of you will know. And 3 jobs here, one for the DFE, one for the City Council, and I've been at the University of Birmingham since 2018. It's a very outward-facing role. That's kind of what I do. So I'm working with school leaders and governors every day, every week, keeping in touch with what's happening, not on the front line anymore, but working to support a lot of governors and leaders. I'm also taking stock of the national picture. So for example, this afternoon, I was working with epidemiologists on a study of COVID infection rates in schools up and down the country. That's with London School of Hygiene, Tropical Medicine. So a few points by way of introduction. First of all, what's happening with COVID is actually shining a light on long-standing inequalities in our society. Birmingham is a deeply unequal city. Going on 2018 data, it is the 6th most deprived local authority in England. And these are scary statistics. 50% of the children live in the most deprived decile of the English population. And we have huge contrasts. So Ladywood constituency has the 3rd highest level of poverty in the UK, whereas Sutton Coldfield is the 15th lowest. Now, I don't want to paint a negative portrait of our city. I always want to celebrate Birmingham's super diversity and its status as the youngest city in England. I have found this, and there are comparisons with Liverpool, I found it to be a passionate and compassionate city. I've often described Birmingham as England's best kept secret, because whereas us Liverpudlians are very, very gobby about what we've got in our city, Brubbies, you're very modest about all of the wonderful things in the city, but we cannot escape the harsh facts that inequality runs deep. So the impact in terms of children and young people has amplified what we saw already. So access to learning has been extremely variable, and a worrying growth in parents who've decided to take their children completely outside of the state education system. We see this nationally too. The digital divide has really been emphasised. I remember a student from Aston University Engineering Academy talking some months back on the news. He said, look, we've got a device in the house, we've got 1 tablet, 5 of us are of school age, and he was doing his A-levels. So yeah, that's tough. Accessing learning at home when your first language isn't English can bring difficulties in this kind of situation. Accessing health and social care services when many members of our community are actually afraid to leave the house. And in a lot of children's families, the loss of parental jobs in low-income households, cash in hand work, all of that has gone. There's no safety margin, and that's leading to hungry children. For the young people themselves, I'm thinking particularly like at Ninestiles with Alex, there's a double jeopardy here, because without very careful handling of the situation, the exam results, GCSE, A-level, BTEC could really suffer this summer. And to date, unfortunately, the government's handling of education during the pandemic has not inspired much confidence. 73% of teachers surveyed recently by Teacher Tap felt that the DfE had done a very bad job so far. So what's my assessment of the situation? Having said all of this, I think it's really important that we don't portray things wholly negatively. I've been looking since the pandemic at children's and young people's experiences and situations where they've become refugees. They've experienced war and trauma, particularly through the work of the International Rescue Committee. What we learn from that is that children are generally incredibly resilient, and that most of our children will overcome what's happened to them since early 20 without suffering chronic mental health problems. What happens with many of our young people in Birmingham is that their educational performance and their rites of passage through the system are a couple of years delayed from their more advantaged peers. That's been there already. I think we'll see more of that. Some, of course, will need specialist support, but I am actually worried about messages that are a bit doom-laden from some senior commentators. And many school leaders tell me that their pupils and students are craving normality and a return to school, not really wanting to be quizzed in depth about how they're feeling about the pandemic. Accessing normal behaviours once more is therapeutic for most of us. So yes, there is some delay. And I'm going to quote the person who I think is Birmingham's most influential educationalist from the last century, and it washes into this century too, Professor Sir Tim Brighouse. He used the phrase unwarranted optimism. In other words, we have no right to be optimistic, but if we don't have a sense of optimism, it could be dangerous. So we've got to think long and hard about what we're learning from the pandemic, how that tells us we need to change society for children and young people in the city. That goes for schools, of course, but it's a much wider social tableau about creating or perhaps recreating that team around the child and the family. Nearly finished now. Fine. Every day I see minor miracles out there that are making the difference. People from so many organizations are reaching out to families to keep them going, whether that's through a food parcel or a tablet being delivered to the front door of the house. Whether you're a voluntary organization, a religious community, whether it's school, children's social care, everyone is working together. But I don't underestimate the scale of the challenge. And now I'm going to ask our first expert contributor to tell us about what she's seeing. So I'm going to be familiar with you here and call you Abby here, because that's what the name says on screen.
Yeah, that's fine. I won't I won't ask you to say my surname.
So Abby, tell us what you're seeing from your perspective, your lived experience from Millennium Point, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. Real pleasure to be here this evening. Millennium Point, we're a charity based down at Eastside. And our charity was set up to support STEM in the West Midlands, STEM education and projects. And we do that through, as Deirdre mentioned, funding it through being a landlord and an event space. And we use our funds to give scholarships to children so that they can go to university without a financial barrier. And we give out small grants of up to £20,000 to different organisations, schools, etc., in the STEM arena. So we see a lot of the issues that are out there, and those issues are getting bigger. Now, since working at Millennium Point, you know, I've really had my eyes open to the amazing opportunities that are out there in the STEM sector. And I think there's a lot out there in terms of people not really understanding those great opportunities, and the fact that really STEM is about solving world problems, really. So really it's I think it's an easy sell to children to join the STEM sector. And you know, if you think of all the things that are out there in terms of forensic science to solve crimes and curing diseases, and, you know, even climate change. People are using AI and technology. It's some real exciting opportunities out there. And I think we talk about COVID, and what COVID also highlighted was the fact that it's the STEM sector that is keeping us alive and keeping us connected and keeping us safe. And you think, why wouldn't you want to be part of this amazing sector? And there is so many routes to get in there. There's apprenticeships, go straight from school, you can go through university. So the opportunities are out there. But despite all of those opportunities, in the UK, there's still a huge skills gap. And we've been seeing that. So as a charity ourselves who's trying to promote STEM, it's like, why have we got this skills gap? And this is where we start to identify the issues. Some of the reasons for the shortage is that technology and digital is growing faster than we ever, you know, that we can train the workforce. It doesn't attract the same numbers of people like doctors and accountancy and law. The jobs that exist in 10 years' time don't exist right now. So it's really hard to get that ready. And there's a study that came out with STEM learning in 2018 and education technology. And they said that this skill shortage is translating into these figures. So we've got a current shortfall of 173,000 skilled workers. The gap between girls and boys is increasing rather than decreasing. And lots of employers are saying there's a lack of workplace skills out there. So employers are saying, well, we can't, you know, they're not coming through. We're not getting those skills. And all this is at a time when STEM sector is set to double over the next 10 years. And the shortage alone at the moment of 173,000 is really costing this country, the businesses, about 1.5 billion a year. So the statistics are quite eye-opening. So it seems easy. How do we get these children into this great opportunities that will change not only their lives, but their families' lives? And Millennium Point's really committed to doing that. And what we don't want to do is treat it with a sticking plaster and just provide equipment, which we do through our grants. We want to look at the big issue and really drill down and see what the problem is. And as I said earlier, we look at it in different layers, really. Layer one, I think it's highlighting the STEM careers for everyone, regardless of background of the STEM sector. That has to be the first thing, because these opportunities are for all. And that's one thing that we do at Millennium Point. When we look at the grants, we don't look in any particular area because we don't want one group of people to be sacrificed compared to another. So it's about everyone. And then the second layer, we look at the deprived areas of Birmingham, the ones where the schools don't have the equipment, they don't have the teams that can go out and get those grants. And you know, we're supporting those with 3D printers and whatever they need. But then there's a layer that really came out of what we were looking at, and that was the ones that we call aspiration poverty. So one of the things I've identified, and something that's actually quite close to my heart, and Deirdre mentioned that I'm from the South Wales mining village, is that I grew up in the 80s when all the mines were on strike. It was a pretty dire situation, and my mum had 3 jobs and we just got through it. But we were financially poor, but we weren't aspiration poor, because my mum really pushed me. She really wanted me to get on and was behind me with the support, or whatever support she could give me, and told me that she had belief in me so I could believe in myself. And I think that there's a real problem out there with aspiration poverty. And that is something that we really need to target, because I think if we can help the financially deprived by putting things there for them. But if you don't aspire to be something or have something, then that's a real problem. But it's a problem that can be fixed. And it's the real, how can someone be what they can't see? And unfortunately, for many children in the West Midlands, that is a reality, and they deserve that opportunity to change their lives and their families' lives. And you know, I'm talking about it from STEM, because that is the area we look at and we see the masses of opportunities. But this applies to all jobs and careers out there. So when I was looking at this Aspiration Poverty, I found in 2008, which was 13 years ago now, the Department of Education looked at done a study which looked at aspirations, and they discovered that for a child to have high aspirations, they need 4 things, which is inspiration, information, self-esteem, and self-efficacy. And what that study showed was the importance of introducing children to new people and new experiences beyond their families and their friends. So when I look at my situation, my mum was able to call upon people that she knew. She made sure that I got some work experience in a local shop. She was pushing me, however small that was, she was pushing me. And this study looked at social networks amongst the low aspirations. And they said that the children that had no access to work experience, didn't have access to schools, what they call bridging social capital, had real low aspirations. And I think what that, for me, thinking, well, 13 years on, we're still facing that same problem. And I think it's that saying, and it's so true, it takes a community to raise a child. And I think those children, to get to those aspirations, to build those aspirations, I really think there's a role for the private sector to play in this. And that's something that we feel quite strongly about at Millennium Point, and we're trying to do that, to bring the private sector in to help deal with the aspirational issues. And COVID-19, it's exacerbated the problem, but it's uncovered, I think, it's shone a light on a problem that's always been there and will be there long after the pandemic's gone, unless we do something about it. Now, I'll come on to digital poverty in a bit, but that is, you know, digital poverty has been there for a long time and will continue to be there, but there's lots of great things that are starting to happen, but it needs a big force behind it to make any real difference. Now, when I was looking into this, and this is something that I'd really like businesses to start getting involved, and there's a concept, and I don't know if anyone's heard of this, it's called We Economy, and it came out of a charity called We Charity, which was set up by 2 brothers in the States, Craig and Mark Carberger. And initially it was set up to free children in Africa and India from poverty and exploitation. But what they've discovered over the last few years is actually this problem is prevalent in the US and the UK. And what they're saying is their adage, and this is what I want what we want to do at Millennium Point to get the private sector involved, is to say, look, where profits and purpose come together, then everyone wins. The company wins and the community wins. And I think in a time at the moment, you've seen it it's happened all over the last 10 years, I'd say, that everyone seems to be retreating inwards. And I think the rise of the individual and me first mentality has happened, and this behaviour is not helping the young people, these people who don't know where to go. And I'm not blaming their families, because their families don't know where to go. They haven't got access to this. And so we should be helping them and putting initiatives in place to open their eyes. And for a lot of them, they're scared. They're scared of new experiences. So the private sector, we think, have a real role to play in that. And so WeEconomy, actually, there are examples in the UK, in Crawley and in Swansea, and what they've collaborated, who they've collaborated with is Virgin, and they've called it the Passport for Change Initiative. And it's a 3-year programme where Virgin work with communities to drive up the aspirations of those children. And yes, Virgin is a huge, huge business, but that doesn't mean only big businesses can get involved in that. And I think businesses that have a real purpose to them as well as profit generation will win. Because if you have that company ethos, people want to work for you, people want to work with you, and we should work, you know, they should work together as opposed to at one cost to the other. And, you know, if you think about it, what's in it for business of working together? Well, they're building a workforce that will come to them. They're creating successful outcomes. They're, you know, they're making their businesses a good place to work in. And there's plenty, you know, when I talk about Virgin, that it's not, you don't have to be a big business. There's so many businesses in the West Midlands that I know of who have a real philanthropic outlook, and they are real successful businesses, and they're doing some amazing things. And I think my call out is for businesses to really help work with us and provide work experience. It doesn't have to cost, the things that they could do doesn't really have to cost anything, but I think it makes their businesses much more interesting and successful. So there's just, we were talking about digital poverty, you know, as an example. Millennium Point, we've partnered now with Intercity UK, which are in Birmingham, and Aston Villa, WOW group of companies as well, and a company called RePC, and we've come together to try and get more and more laptops and connectivity out there for children that really, really need it. And we've started to be able to deliver those. So not only are they getting a laptop, but they're getting connectivity for a year. And hopefully we can extend that for another year, because digital poverty is not COVID related. COVID has highlighted it, but it's not going to go away ever. So this is a problem that will be going on. So, you know,
Abby, one more minute, please.
Oh yeah, so we're doing that, and no, I'm just finishing up now. So those are the type of things that businesses are coming together. We've also done a STEM roundtable where we're bringing businesses and education and higher education together to really push this and really make a difference. And so for me, it's all about dealing with aspiration poverty and really working as a community to deal with these problems. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You wouldn't have been able to see this whilst you were talking, but you stimulated a very vibrant conversation in the chat room there. The phrases, well, two phrases resonating with me. One, you said, how can you be what you can't see? And that led us into a conversation about empathy and aspiration, the relationship there. And then the 3 Ps, these wonderful aphorisms. Profits and purpose is positive, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that binds us together, as it were, as a society, as the Lunar Society, because it's representative of so many strands of Birmingham's civic society. So thank you very much. Take a breather. And
thank you.
I'm going to now invite Alex to share with us your take on things. What's life looking like in Ninestiles these days?
Hi, good evening, everybody, and thank you for that introduction and for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. When I talked to David about discussing my place on this panel, He said it would be the view from the front line in education. And I thought actually the last few weeks have felt a bit more like no man's land really than the front line, with kind of all the changes in direction and the uncertainty that's been going on. Over the next few minutes, I'll talk to you about my own view from education, some of which is research and evidence backed, but most of it actually will just be my kind of impressions developed over the past 10 months in school in this pandemic. I think it's important, as I talk to you, to understand when we talk about enabling disadvantaged students to succeed, it's really important that we understand what disadvantage looks like actually in school and how it manifests itself on a kind of day-to-day basis for us. And it was already mentioned in the introduction that at Ninestiles, it's written in our mission statement that we're tackling disadvantage and removing barriers to learning. And actually, a lot of those barriers, for reasons that have already been mentioned this evening, have been reinforced during this period. So as I go through this, I'll split the impact into kind of three main areas and address some tentative ways forward, which I'm sure as we go through discussion in the chat, that will be built on. I think firstly, there's obviously the impact on student outcomes and attainment. The Ofsted annual report last year suggested that Year 7 students' writing scores in September 2020 were the equivalent to the most recently assessed Year 5 cohort, and considerably behind where the same group were when they were in Year 6. So the national picture on things like the writing assessments is that students are regressing, and we do see this and recognise it. We've put lots of work into actively addressing our curriculum at Ninestiles and across the Summit Learning Trust, but we're seeing students achieve less well than they would in normal times, and our internal data shows that that's a real challenge for us to ensure they learn and remember as well as they were doing before with us. We place a huge emphasis within Summit Learning Trust on reading and literacy, as many studies have shown the impact that this has negatively on outcomes when we reach students' examinations if they've got low reading ages. Again, we found that students are increasingly likely to be behind their chronological reading age. It's something we've been tackling for years, but we seem to be into more of a headwind when we don't have them in front of us every day working on it. We're really lucky in Summit that we work across the three phases. So we've got primary, secondary, and sixth form within our multi-academy trust. And that allows us to work together right across the age group with shared understanding, approaches and strategies that we can put in place and kind of be consistent through the whole process. It's important though, as the theme of tonight is that all of these measures impact most starkly on the most disadvantaged students we see in front of us. Disadvantage does of course takes many forms. We rightly use, and I'll use without even realising it, jargon about pupil premium and free school meals that people use relatively interchangeably. But at the moment, if you're a special educational needs student, you're being disadvantaged by the absence or certainly the alteration of your normal specialist provision that schools work really hard to put in place and support, which limits then students from fulfilling their academic potential. And we're working really creatively at Ninestiles and many other schools to address those issues. It's already been mentioned tonight how technology will be a real positive that comes out of this. And it's weird to think that it was only 3 weeks ago that we went into kind of full-time online and remote learning. And in that time, staff have worked really creatively to have breakout rooms and kind of one-to-one sessions with students that will become part of our norm as we go forward, that just weren't on the landscape at all 3 weeks ago. But it doesn't quite replace what happens in that moment normally in school. You'll know as well that people say schools are closed, but we're not closed at all. And we've been open to our vulnerable students and our key worker students throughout this time. And having them in with us has been incredibly important. And I think families have really appreciated that in the community. And that's built some links that are really strong and will continue to be built on and endure as we come out the other side of this. Again, the second main kind of area of impact has already been mentioned briefly this evening, but it's been felt through student and indeed family wellbeing and mental health. The Children's Commissioner Anne Longfield in a report last year said that as many as 1 in 6 young people are currently suffering mental health issues, and NSPCC data suggests that eating disorders are up about 1/3 amongst children. In Abby's point, she talked about inspiration, information and self-esteem. And in our own surveys of our students, we've already seen that they've had a fall in their self-regard, their self-confidence in their learning, and their perceived potential as a learner in the future. And as an Everton fan, it pains me to quote a Liverpool manager, but Jurgen Klopp recently said that confidence is a fragile flower. And so much of its growth for young people happens when they're in school. And obviously they're missing that face-to-face at the moment. And we've seen an increase in students who are in receipt of free school meals from the outset of the pandemic. And our safeguarding team, which is a really well-established team and an integral part of our school, heavily invested in supporting students and their families. And the DFE State of the Nation report 2020 indicated that in the first phase of the pandemic, 33% of low-income families saw a significant drop in their income, compared with 29% of families from more affluent backgrounds. We've certainly seen that at Ninestiles, and it increases with every safeguarding measure you can think about. We've seen increases on that front, and that's put huge pressure on the local authority services that we're part of, as was mentioned in the introduction tonight. I think one great unknown is the level of disadvantage amongst those that feel either unwilling or unable to ask for help. When we first reached out to parents about the devices and about the laptop schemes coming through, I always remember the first number that we got back was that we needed 28 devices. And we thought that can't possibly be right. And slight changes in the wording and the kind of reaching out to parents and the reassurance that it was okay to ask for that help has meant we've given out 15 times that number, which just shows the kind of depth of the digital poverty that was mentioned earlier that exists. And it's not just obviously the digital poverty. I take for granted that I can sit here in a room on my own and be in front of a laptop presenting to you. Many of our families might now have the devices, but don't have the spaces to be able to do that either. I just think that the pandemic's really laid bare some of those issues that, you know, we deal with relatively, you know, regularly in school actually, and we deal with them really sensitively and discreetly, but this required people to come out and actually ask for help, and some people find that really difficult. That links back, as has been mentioned, to the kind of need that there is for the local services and local authorities to work really closely with schools and those bonds to be really strong and secure. I think the third major area, and this ties into some of what Abby was saying, is that it's the cost of lost opportunities. And in the long term, that might be the hardest one to resolve, actually. I'm sure when we come on to kind of more discussion and debate, that there'll be lots to contribute on this front, but I think it's the real intangibles that school gives that are the hardest to measure and therefore the hardest to quantify their loss. Pupil premium students nationally attend less well than their peers, and they're overrepresented in persistent absenteeism groups. That's students who are absent for 10% or more of their school career. That's been exacerbated in this period, and when we returned in September, it was those hard to reach students anyway that were hardest to reach again. And when students are not in school, whether it's through a lockdown or bubble closure, parental apprehension perhaps about sending them back in at that time, they miss out on the expert teaching, obviously, the structure of a school day, behavioural norms and routines that are both reinforced by staff and also their peers. They miss out on a hot meal, which has been a hot topic as well, but is a really simple, straightforward one. And they miss out on social interaction, which obviously is such a key part to children developing, as well as the kind of exams and outcomes and all of that. The social interaction is a huge part of it. And it's not to say, by the way, that those issues are only prevalent amongst disadvantaged students or pupil premium students, but you do see it more prevalently and more obviously in those groups. Furthermore, they'll miss out on cultural capital and social capital, has already been mentioned tonight, and trips, visits, enrichment opportunities that are embedded within the curriculum we offer at Summit Learning Trust. These chances enlighten and enrich our most disadvantaged students in ways that their peers take for granted and routinely experience through their home life in normal times. It also goes on to raise aspirations. You may well have seen earlier this week, there was some news from the Office for Students that said of the 20% of society most likely not to attend university, 93% of them were from disadvantaged white backgrounds. We offer routinely a series of university visits every year to all students, but particularly promoted the attendance of our disadvantaged students so that they can see university as a viable option and raising of aspiration. We did it this year virtually, which isn't quite the same thing, but 76% of our Year 9 students said that they felt it had helped them aim higher and consider university more fully. And again, going back to kind of how technology will be a positive, although that isn't like going to Cambridge or Oxford or any other university, it will allow us to offer more of those opportunities and more virtual events. Not quite like going to see, I don't know, the Empire State Building, but it might be the next best thing. And the topic tonight talks about supporting students to reach their potential. And I know some of what I've said will have been, you know, really looking at the challenges that we're faced with, but there have been some real positives and some hope that we can offer. I mentioned the laptop and internet access scheme, and although that was initially slow to get going, it's allowed us at Ninestiles to support about 400 families, and across the Summit Learning Trust, nearly 1,500 families. And as a result, we have seen an increase in student engagement with our online platforms, the software packages we use to get the kind of learning and the recall with the students. And for the first time ever, we're seeing our pupil premium students answer more questions and watch more support videos than our non-pupil premium students. And, you know, our kind of average student engagement is in the mid-80s, and we've had over 90% of our students active on our platforms at various points. So giving the opportunity to students has meant that they've then taken the opportunity to engage with school more than they would have done previously. I also think it's been a real positive, the importance of school as a focal point in the community, and the fact that that's been reinforced in this time. It can be built on with schools really engaging more actively in mental health support, tackling food poverty, and just, I don't know, being there for families, as long as we're properly resourced and financed to do that well. A lot of work has gone on naturally, and it's been picked up by schools who've got just a strong moral imperative to support the community, but you have to have the structures in place to be able to do a good job of that. And this period, I think, has also seen an increase in the trust and appreciation for teaching as a profession and staff who work in schools. This hopefully then will offer a platform for education to be more shaped by the professionals within it. And there are various groups and discussions taking place within the profession, but a system that values the needs of the learner over the need for an easy accountability measure will be one that will serve the community and our young people really effectively. And then if you'll just give me a moment of self-indulgence at the end of this as a teacher, my final point is that I wonder how many of you here tonight chose a GCSE, an A-level, a university course, or even a career because of a teacher that inspired you. You know, it's a very human interaction, and a presence of a positive role model who makes you believe that anything is possible is currently the thing that I think is most missing on the day-to-day for our students, and virtual interactions like this just don't replace that. And that's the thing I think that will be a really hard long-term measure to value the impact of. Thank you very much.
Gosh, Alex, huge amount of food for thought there. And I'm thinking, you know, having listened to yourself and Abby now, you know, we could dine out now for the next couple of hours on what you've brought to us already. Now, why on earth a good Brummie lad like you supports Everton is frankly beyond me. You know, but I'm a member of your fan club now because you did quote Jurgen Klopp, and I'm of that YNWA, you should never try to work alone or walk alone philosophy. So some great things there. One thing I you know, that resonates is that the whole creation of social capital. We often use the phrase about getting kids outside of their postcode, because they wouldn't otherwise get that unless you took them yourselves. And that's lost for the moment. So undoubtedly there are lost opportunities, but I thought that was a brilliant cameo of one downtown inner city, if you like, very good school and everything it's doing for the community. A lot of stuff in there, a lot of really good stuff. Thank you. And talking of getting outside of your postcode, there is a service in Birmingham that has been doing that for a very long time through music. And I think that's the segue to bring in Sharon, because what I think we'll do, Deirdre, as keep an eye on the clock, is revise the running order slightly. So we now go to Sharon, and then we'll have about half an hour or so at the end to listen to everyone, get everyone's contributions and pull it all together. So Sharon, welcome.
Thank you, Colin. Great to be with you all this evening. So yes, as Colin said, we're a charity, Services for Education. We deliver music education in all of Birmingham schools. So in normal times, we teach or provide ensemble opportunities for 34,000 children each week. And we also provide training and consultancy services. So I guess the perspective that I'm coming from is one from an organisation that works in a large proportion of the Birmingham schools. But I just, before sort of diving in to a whistle-stop tour of what we do, wanted to just step back for a moment, building on some of what Alex and Abby have been saying so far, and just ask you, I wonder what conjures up in your mind when you use that term disadvantaged. Because as we've touched on already, there is the educational definition, there's links to parental income, there's pupil premium, as Alex mentioned, free school meals. But as he also mentioned, disadvantage can be emotional as well as financial, and financial is very easy to measure, emotional much less so, and yet emotional can impact all children. And I think if the pandemic causes us to do one thing, it's to contemplate challenges that we perhaps didn't realise existed before. And in one way or another, all children have been disadvantaged through the pandemic, and absolutely rightly. There's lots of talk about inadequate free school meals and access to technology. You might have heard of an organisation called the Sutton Trust, and they promote social mobility really right from birth through to kind of first job. And their report, Learning in Lockdown, published recently, said that 19% of parents said that there was not enough access to technology in the home. But of course, there was differences. 35% was the report in lower income families, 11% in highest. That home learning divide that we've already heard is really marked, whether it is the access to online, parents' ability to homeschool, or indeed, as Alex said, even access to quiet space. The National Housing Federation produced a report recently saying that 1.6 million children in UK live in what would be defined as an overcrowded household. So what did come to mind for you when I asked about disadvantaged children? Was it the more obvious things that we've heard about? And that's fine if it did, because they should do. But what about the less obvious things? So the parent who has suddenly lost their parent due to COVID and they're having to homeschool. The one for whom English is not the first or indeed the second language, and they're having to support the child. What about that adult who has lost their job in the pandemic, who perhaps was from a high income family, but because they've overstretched on the mortgage, job market's not there, suddenly they're in a very difficult position. We've heard about mental health and so on and so forth. And actually, when I asked my teachers about this week, one of them said, it can be as simple as not having access to a printer at home will cause a big disadvantage. So in the next 7 minutes or so, I'm going to try and give you a whistle-stop tour of some of the ways that Services for Education, either pre-pandemic, during, or as we go forward, seeks to support disadvantaged children and young people. So the first of the things I'm going to tell you about is a programme we've got called Health for Life. And that is a programme where we promote healthy living and active lifestyles. And that's through a number of different strands. So healthy eating, growing things, exercise, and importantly, parental involvement. So the programme has been going for about 10 years. It's operated in 153 schools and 24 nursery schools. And in the earlier schools, it was absolutely focused on the most disadvantaged areas of the city. Obviously now it's a little bit more all-encompassing, but it's helpful because it allows us to look at disadvantage through 3 lenses. And I'm just going to say a word or two about each, but then bring it to life with a quote from a school leader for each one. So firstly, it helps us think about disadvantage of opportunity. So often inner city children have less access to open space, to gardens. They don't necessarily grow things. They don't know where food comes from. That means that they can be reluctant to trying things, and they are less keen on physical activity. So let me tell you about Jane. Jane is obviously not her name, but this was a quote from a school leader. Jane is a little girl in year 3. She had low attendance linked to her fear of engaging in physical activity. She was encouraged to come to the Change for Life Club. She was reluctant, but she came. Her attendance has improved greatly. 53 absences one year, 12 the following. She's now reading at home more. She's even been seen skipping at school. Hopefully there's more Janes out there as well. Then we have disadvantage of emotional well-being. So the projects that the children do get them to try new things. And as I've been reflecting on this, I thought, gosh, it's no surprise that helps with their emotional health, because what have we all turned to in lockdown? It's been gardening and cooking and all of that kind of thing. And again, a quote from a school leader. We had 2 boys at risk of permanent exclusion. Since attending breakfast club, they've started coming in on time, eating properly. They share their learning manners and dining skills. They're mixing with children in different groups, building new relationships. And then it helps us address wider community disadvantage, because those programs don't stop at the school gate. They engage the parents. It can be as easy as inviting the parents in to try the soup that the children have made. And again, a quote, the increase in physical activity at school has successfully engaged whole families. One family had a child in the pedometer club, another in the Change for Life club. As a result, their mum attended the walk a mile and is now part of the parents' walking group. So those Health for Life schools are absolutely still engaged in lockdown, but my goodness, how much more important are some of those things going to be when we get all the children back in school? So that's Health for Life. Moving on to music, which is probably what we're more known for. You might have heard of the term whole class instrument tuition. That's when we literally take a whole class of instruments into a primary school. That started about 16 years ago, but when it started, we were asked by the council to provide that service for free in 7 of the most disadvantaged schools in the city. And we still work today in 6 of those, because time and time again, learning music has been shown to have a broader advantage. Things like improving with memory, improving with concentration, and so on and so forth. We work in all schools, but 62% of the children that we work with are in receipt of free school meals. And we know that there are areas of the city where we would define as cold spots, where music isn't there, where we have to be more targeted in our intervention. And when we do that, we do it for the long term. So 20 years ago, Sheldon and Shard End were identified as areas where we came together with the school leaders, with the community, to make a concerted difference. And some of those young people that learned then still play today, and indeed some of them went on to learn music at university. Today, we work in a similar vein in schools in the south of the city. Through Arts Council funding, we get to work with students in what we would describe as alternative settings. So these are children that have been excluded. And again, teaching them in a different environment makes a big difference. And some of what we do is much less in the public eye. So we work with the council to provide one-to-one vocal and instrument tuition to look after children in care. And again, that's about raising aspirations. So last year, some of those children took part in a workshop with Welsh National Opera. And I was thrilled to hear that totally on his own back, one of those children had signed up to the Welsh National Opera's summer lockdown project. And actually, you can see that young man on their video. But we see a real advantage if we can get in early. And actually that links back to what Alex was talking about in terms of kind of speech and words and vocabulary, that kind of thing. So we have just published a report on our project called Sound Tots, where we have worked with 300 4- and 5-year-olds in nursery settings through music and movement and singing. And the results have been really quite staggering, and it's quite exciting. So at the start of that project, those children were 90% behind, sorry, 90% of those children were behind their expected speech at that age group. 20 weeks later, it's reduced to 40%. So we need to find more funding to get in early because it makes such a difference. The list could go on. I'm not going to say more about what we do, except to say that that access to music for everyone is important through everything we do. So we offer free instruments to all, ensemble membership to all. But to conclude, I just want to take you back to what I said about kind of reimagining disadvantage. because at the moment it's fascinating. We can deliver everything that we do virtually, but not all schools are taking us up on that. And not all parents are able to support if the school does take us up on that. And yet, when children still learn music in lockdown, we're actually seeing progression over and above normal rates. And that's great, but of course the gap increases, and that's before we think about the health and well-being impact. So I just want to kind of leave us with a thought, one question to reflect on, which is, how can we reimagine our definition of disadvantage so that as we emerge from lockdown, we don't ignore the issues that arise from hidden disadvantage? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much there, Sharon. So my own autobiographical story is growing up on the banks of the Mersey, the right bank of the Mersey, the Liverpool side, not the heathens on the other side. And of course, when you're growing up as a kid in that sort of society, this is in South Toxteth, you're not aware of, well, today's lexicon is all about disadvantage, multiple disadvantage, and so forth. It's all about the community. So we were probably cash poor, technically speaking, but culturally very rich. There was a lot going on. And I think we just need to reflect on that a little bit before we label whole swathes of society as being disadvantaged. And I think what you brought us there is a much more, well, it's invitational. Think about a much more nuanced, granular way of understanding our children and their families. And you know that I'm going to indulge myself here and just mention the music service. You know, I'm a big paid up fan. One of the things I've missed like hell is last year was the youth proms at Symphony Hall. So you got it going digitally, and it was a technological miracle how it all worked. But goodness me, one of the most inspirational things you will ever see, and many of us have seen it in the city, is when children literally from I guess Rednall Green up to the far north of Sutton, from west and east, come together to sing and perform at Symphony Hall. There is no greater model of creation of cultural and social capital in the city. But it's not just about, and forgive the phrase, oboes in Harborne or whatever. I was out in Chardenne one day opening a new kitchen and in a school, and we did that. We had lunch, it was wonderful. Then suddenly we had to get out of the way because there was a trombone ensemble in a part of the city where without what the music service S4E provides would never, ever, ever have happened. And this to me is about that conscious positive discrimination to enriching children's cultural lives, no matter where they live in the city. So that's,
I'm just going to say what you said about the youth proms. I think the thing we see with that Symphony Hall experience, it's talk about the raising aspiration bit that Abby was talking about, for any child to get to play in Symphony Hall, and for their parents and their carers and their friends, etc., to come and see, it's just fantastic, isn't it?
Yes, and that's very inclusive. I was just saying hello to Stephen here. Good evening, Mr. Goldstein, because you wrote to me in advance of this and saying, well, I hope you're going to, tonight, we are going to think about children with special educational needs and how they're faring during the pandemic and what we can do for them. So what I'm going to do now, I think, Deirdre, we're probably best doing a bit of co-chairing here together, so we can keep an eye on who's got hands up and who would like to contribute. There's a very, very rich conversation line there in the chat room. Let's invite anyone who would like to vocalize what you've been writing. Some great material there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Colin. Absolutely fantastic material, and I can see Stephen is vigorously waving at us. So please do, Stephen.
Yeah, very interesting, particularly last speaker, but aspirational. Without the opportunity can also be destructive. That's what worries me. And the reference of being encouraged by school teachers, being a local mostly grammar school educated boy, the thing that motivated me more than anything was the maths teacher telling me that I'd never make anything of myself. So it's really interesting. My particular interest is with SEND, special educational needs. And it's probably one of the most satisfying things when one can create an opportunity for them to achieve the smallest of things. Often aspirational should take you from one place to another. It shouldn't necessarily be measured in getting the best job or the best house or anything else. And I'd just like to give you one example, which is not special needs, but I got involved a number of years ago with something called the Duke of Edinburgh Award, because I was actually quite anti the Duke of Edinburgh Award, because I thought it was for privileged people, it was for army people, police people, and through boys' clubs in London, where I was involved in through a charity I co-chaired, giving them some money, I went down and I met a young man who was told he was an abject failure and would never make anything of himself. And they were keeping him off the streets by doing boxing and something else. And he then did the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and he got a bronze. And that completely changed his life, his attitude. And he then encouraged loads of people in what you would call deprived areas to get involved. So I think it comes in different forms. I honestly believe that different things inspire different people, but somehow the end of it has to be the opportunity for them to advance themselves. Often we all face problems, and we will come to the conclusion that what we may blame it on diversity or all sorts of things, but the only people that will get us out of that problem is ourselves. And when you can encourage people to take that sort of attitude, they will achieve.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're into some really, really complex stuff here about aspiration, particularly for those who do have special education needs, disability. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about a model of education that actually takes away people from their own culture, their own roots? Because there is some of that built into it. You know, it's particularly with the education model we have in the country right now, which is, as Alex touched on, and I think others have touched on in commentary, very narrow in definition, and there's not much celebration of your own community. It's always that sense of, oh, you could do better, you could move on. You look at the Michaela School in North London. The head is celebrating the fact that so many of them have Oxbridge acceptances and all of that sort of stuff. That's fine for some people. It is not good and cannot be good by definition for everybody. So it produces, like Abby said, if you can't see it, you know, how can you be it? Not everybody can be that very thing. What do other people think? What do you think? So we'd like to speak to their words.
John Rainford has his hand up, Colin.
Yes, John. Get your mic off, John, or on rather. John, your mic.
Yeah, I'm on. Thank you very much. Now, as a student who went to a grammar school in Toxteth, the very year that you're talking about, Yeah, I think we all have like mixed views about what can help our children grow to a much more less fearful world. But I think it always comes back to, you know, how we build relationships. What if happiness is about purpose, then how can we develop empathy within schools? You know, in my view, if we had empathy, you saw how other people lived, you'd have less bullying, you'd have less prejudice and so on. So I think empathy is the core thing to building relationships, and that would circumvent a lot of the adverse health issues such as, you know, mental health and so on. And it's building confidence by building the person, because we've spoken, one of the speakers spoke about the confidence comes from within. But I think that's key to, you know, building relationships, understanding the self and in your relationship with others, and then seeing it in a wider context, which is why it needs to go from the bottom up, but also from the top down. So the CEOs have a role and a duty, I think, as the community does. So it's not like, oh, it's down to the teachers or it's down to the politicians. It's everybody's responsibility. Unless we take that on board, we're not going to affect change. And the paradigm shift that I've spoke to in the text boxes is about changing the whole, in other words, building a completely new model. So we're helping places in Africa and India. I'm on a conference call on Sunday to an Indian audience about changing the education paradigm. And I think the problem with the UK is that it's so set in its ways, it can't shift easily. You know, we're stuck with what we've got, and we want to try and fix it and then keep fixing it. And but it's a plaster over a plaster. And so it's not actually doing anything. So the reason I'm more encouraged to work with, you know, Indian students or African students is simply because you start from the bottom up, top down, but we're getting the businesses involved with the communities. And it's like we need a new form of leadership. CEOs need to be much more empathic with their employees. It runs right across the board, and there should be better relationships throughout. And you know, we can create. Somebody mentioned the structure. Once we've got the structure in place, these things can come together. And I think we need to, instead of breaking the system because it's already broken, we need to create a new system. And a famous guy called Buckminster Fuller said you can't fix things over and over again. You've got to create a new model which makes the old model redundant. And that's the future of education. And that's either we'll get it or other people will get it. So I'm working with pockets around the world, some places in Canada and pockets of Europe, and including hopefully soon with CERN, about bringing this systemic thinking into the education system. And that's what we need. We need a paradigm shift that moves it away from the old system, which has been around for hundreds of years. And still, you know, you'll notice that Toxteth Grammar School actually is demolished now. In some respects, that's the old system. And we need to be thinking about new systems and new relationships, which are much more empathic and relationship building and meaningful. So I'm sorry if that sounds like a bit of a speech, but I'm passionate about these things.
So John, you've worked with some high roller organizations, some blue chip companies. What's the incentive for them to change their modus operandi, their business model, to become the things that you talked about and engage with the wonderfully rich sort of groups that we have here engaged, which very much reflect Birmingham society?
Well, we did it with Halfords. Halfords funded a systemic approach in the school in Warwick. We've done it in pockets around the country. We've got Shell to fund certain pockets of activity. It's just really, it comes back to what somebody said right at the beginning. It's about language. You need to use the appropriate language, but not as a sort of, oh, give us some money, you know, type attitude. You've got to say, well, okay, there is a key advantage, like that lady said at Millennium Point. There's a key advantage, better employees. It shows that they care about their workforce. But actually, all of those, like for example, with Halfords, you could arguably say, well, they're looking for candidates for their business. You know, the prospects for more, you know, the World Economic Forum, sorry, says that creativity is number one, analytical thinking number two. And those are things we should be pushing into schools, and empathy, and actually bringing those aspects of the better human spirit, if I could put it that way, into the schools. So we all understand what's good and what's right and wrong to an extent, but we need to have systems in place that encourage that sort of activity, which is engaging businesses. Yes, you know, it's better for business if they have a happier workforce, but you know, a lot of businesses still haven't got that together. So we're just working with businesses that do get it, and we're working with CEOs in London that do get this idea of creating a better society, a better community. And we've got pockets around the world now. We're joining forces with other entities around the world that are engaging business the right way, using the right language, not the begging bowl attitude, but actually how can we work together to create a better society? You know, who wants our children to come into a world where they're fearful? Nobody wants that. So why don't we do something about it as a community and have a joined up approach instead of all these myopic viewpoints, which is, you know, a charity will do one thing, but it's not actually addressing other issues. And this is what you get with systems thinking. You might have a wound, but it's not actually, you know, it's putting a plaster on it isn't going to fix anything. It's just going to be a temporary fix. And it doesn't actually fix it anyway. So I think, you know, we've had conversations in the past, Colin, about changing education fundamentally. And there's frustration because you've got the institutions that we've been fighting for years. And now it's because the COVID-19 has accelerated, you know, digital learning. Well, the digital learning and AI is our leverage to correct those old adages of it's always worked this way, so let's go with it. You know, why fix it and all that. So we can. I think there is a mood for change now, and I'm certainly doing my bit to enforce. Well, not enforce the change, but I'm working with schools now who want to embrace this idea, and I'm getting the businesses to fund it. Why not? You know,
why not? Why not? Indeed, I was working with head of a group of primary schools the other day, and she said, Colin, I can't contemplate going back to what was normal, because we're right. It feels like in a war zone at the moment. And I think, Alec, you sort of touched on this. You know that there has to be some blue skies thinking about what emerges out of the episode we're going through now, because we know we'll get things under control. Things will relax, thank goodness, and the children will be back in the theatre and education and playing the instruments again and out in the countryside again, all those things that contribute to well-being. But if we just simply returned to what we had before, I know a lot of leaders in education are saying that's a depressing prospect. Would anybody else like to come in who hasn't spoken at all here? Jackie and Nikki, in that order, please. Get your mic on, please, Jackie.
Hi, can you all hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, I very much agree with John in terms of the fact that we need a more holistic and eclectic approach to education, actually. We need to look out the box. And I actually speak as somebody who obviously went through the educational system in this country, actually managed to get a degree. I don't know how I managed to do that, because it was well past my 50s, and I know you'll be shocked that I'm past my 50s, but I was diagnosed with dyslexia. And, you know, to go through these systems and not even know, I just thought hard was hard for everybody. Yeah, so that's a point I want to put out there. And also what this pandemic has done, it's highlighted the fact that we've now got a generation of children being taught at home by unqualified people. And so my question, I don't know who I should be asking this, is there was a lot of people before COVID unqualified to be teaching their children at home. And so I fear for home teaching. I fear for the safeguarding of our children. And I don't know who I should be asking this question to, perhaps Alex. Just wondered what your thoughts were about them two issues. Thank you.
Jackie, thanks very much. What I'm going to do, our next speaker, Nikki, is very well qualified as a former head teacher herself to answer some of your questions, and then we might come back to Alex. So Nikki, welcome. Mic up. There we are.
Thank you. Yes, I'm now working for the King Edward's Trust as a consultant head teacher, and as you know, the Trust has a collection of independent grammar and comprehensive schools. I myself went to a comprehensive school in West Bromwich, so a long time ago. We're talking about fundamental change in education, and I think one of the places it needs to start is looking at the curriculum and what is actually taught in schools. Now, I'm a secondary school specialist, so I can really only speak for that. But we currently have a curriculum which is mainly very academic, both in Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4, and can leave little room for those types of subjects that hook in certain types of children. We know that the children that come through our schools are all individuals with all individual needs, yet we have this almost one-size-fits-all approach to the curriculum. And this was imposed, what, 4 or 5 years ago. It was Michael Gove's initiative, based probably on his own experience as a child when he was at school. I do not think, and I know Tom has heard me say this several times, I do not think in its current form the curriculum is fit for purpose. There is little opportunity for sport, for example, and the arts, both of which are hugely important in a child's upbringing. So that's an area I think that we should be looking at and having a debate on. And this is why I think that at long last, the education profession should be taking the lead on that. We are currently also have the imposition of performance measures, which mean that schools are still building or constructing curriculum in Key Stage 4, the GCSE years, which are academic. I also have a role as a chair of a board of trustees for an academy trust of 2 alternative provision schools in the northwest of Birmingham. And those 2 schools serve children who are at risk of permanent exclusion in years 9 to 11. Now, actually, the academic curriculum doesn't apply in alternative provision settings, so they are able to develop a curriculum that really is tailored to the needs of the students that go there. And and they do their maths and English and science, but there's a greater variety of vocational courses, for example, and a huge amount of careers education. That is absolutely key as well. So I think it's time, we do have time now, we are at the time now where we do need to start this debate about changing the direction of our education system so that it is fit for purpose for the 2020s and beyond. And all those employers who are desperate to have well-skilled students from school and universities and so forth we are able to provide those students because they've actually had a curriculum that fits those needs.
Thank you. You got a few good thumbs up there. Lots of positive body language listening to you there, Nikki. Deirdre's just pointed out that we are due to finish in 3 minutes' time. Would you be amenable to carrying on for another 10 minutes? Well, Clive's in. Yeah, David's in. Yeah, Dennis is nodding. Okay, if anyone really, thank you. If anyone really needs to go, of course you must. And even though Liverpool are playing Spurs at 8 o'clock, I'm with you here. So talk about fragile flower. I think it could be a bit messy for Jurgen Klopp tonight, but there we go. Beginning to pull this together. I'm going to put something on the table now, because I think this is the first of these series, bringing the Lunar Society together like this at such a critical inflection point in society development. I'm wondering, and looking at you, Deirdre, and David here as well, whether you feel there is any mileage in asking our speakers to actually write something down for us, because it feels like there is a burning platform here. I guess our forebearers who went through wars in this country, they said, you know, the welfare state and the state education system, the NHS, were founded as a result of crisis and bad experience. And sometimes a crucible point in society frees people to think, well, things have to be better after this. We have to do things differently. I thought Nikki put it very eloquently there in terms of why there is a need to revise so much of what is done in schools and make it fit for purpose. So yeah, I mean, we have our grammar schools in the city. We also have our alternative provision schools, and they serve very, very different groups of young people. For me, the important thing there is that each individual young person gets what they need at school to enable them to go into employment, into apprenticeship, onto further study, whatever is right for them. So how would people feel about sort of turning our discussion tonight into something slightly more formalized? I don't know, Deirdre, what do you think about that? And Clive, yes. Well, Clive just put his hand up.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Colin, and it actually fits in very nicely with the ethos of the Lunar Society and what we are doing in terms of what we have been progressing over the course of the last year or so, in that we are formalizing the debates that we're having. And I think it's about ensuring that we also get the information out and the outcomes of our discussions to the right audiences. And we certainly have amongst us the intellectual capital and the social mileage in order to achieve that. So yes, absolutely. I think you were probably reading my mind, Colin, because I was definitely going to approach each one of you, the panelists, to further the discussion formally. But I think also there's the element of furthering the discussion online. And I think we do need to involve young people as well, because I mean, we've been talking about aspiration, and amongst us in this room, we are the aspiration. So I think we need to be engaging much more meaningfully, impactfully, and intentionally in order for those aspirations to be realized intergenerationally. So the Lunar Society certainly will be working with people to ensure that that happens.
Thank you. Clive, come in.
Thank you. Deirdre said the vast majority of what I was going to say in a very eloquent manner. I would just add a couple of things, is that the great joy of the Lunar Society is that we are a non-political organisation that encourages quality debate with some end result. And bringing what you said together, it's about trying to distill, thank you, it's trying to distill the wonderful words which have been spoken and how it has generated more conversation on a chat line than I've ever seen before. But it's that distillation that will help, because unless somebody was here listening, they won't appreciate some of what's been going unless we distill it very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. Well, we can make the technology work for us here, because we've got our recording, and we've also got you can harvest the contents of the chat line as well. So we have an authentic record, and then I think. Yeah, I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing here from the chair, because one of the issues from where I've stood in education is that the things we've talked about tonight are often seen to be the sort of, as it were, intellectual province of a narrow group of people. Whereas what we're hearing tonight is from a very broad spectrum of perspectives. And I think the strength of the strength and the outcome of the tonight's discussion would be strong because of the diversity of voices that are at the table. You know, we have that fusion of private enterprise, voluntary sector, the state sector, all aspects, if you like. What we lack, and Deirdre touched on this, is young people. The council has improved, I would say, quite recently, engaging the voice of young people, and there are ways to capture the voice authentically. And of course, young people have a hell of a lot to say about what's going on right now and what they want to happen for the future, what their hopes, what their aspirations are. So perhaps if we, again through you, Deirdre and David, if you were able to fuse what we've talked about tonight with the voice of the young people as well.
Yes, I do see that there is definitely a very clear and obvious roadmap that we have to move forward now. And I think this is certainly going to be quite a catalyst for action, which is one of the pillars of the Lunar Society. So I am very, very grateful to everyone who's been on here tonight and for the diverse thought and the lived experiences that people have promulgated, and it really is something that can support the city and I would say indeed the world, because I think Birmingham is always that place. Forgive me, being an honorary Brummie, I would be a little bit but I think that we are that place that leads by example, and this is exactly what we're going to be doing tonight.
Good. So I think that is a good note to sum up on, Deirdre. We're doing a kind of double act here. We didn't quite know where to go. From me as chair, well, thanks to everyone, because it has been incredibly vibrant conversation. I think it's been really stimulating. So much writing right from the off. There's a lot we can capture there. I particularly appreciated listening to Abby, to Alex and Sharon. So thank you so much. And over to you, Deirdre, for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Colin. I very much, first of all, want to thank each and every one of you for your incredible engagement. Colin's quite right, that the engagement in the chat has been phenomenal from the very beginning, and it's still continuing now. So thank you so very much for being engaged in so many ways, and even the body language, frankly, as I've been watching you on the screen, lots of nodding, lots of smiling, loads of engagement that I feel like you're in my living room with me. So thank you so much for that. And I think just thinking personally myself, in the Bible there's a saying where it says, I know how to abase and I know how to abound. And I come from a private school educated background, albeit in the Caribbean. I think you can tell from my accent. And but then I came to university. I followed a path that my parents frankly wanted me to go on. So I had very much that aspirational aspect. You are going to become a lawyer. You are going to follow your grandfather's footsteps. You are going to do this, do that. And I came to Birmingham, and sadly, through life experiences, one of which I ended up with quite a serious illness, I became disadvantaged, and therefore did my daughter, who ended up on free school meals. And we actually ended up having to take advantage of food banks at one point in our lives. And that was very, very difficult. And what Abby spoke about, the way that Abby spoke about her mother really resonated with me, and the way that I chose to raise my daughter in that period in particular, and the whole inspiration, information, self-esteem, and self-efficacy. I really, I fought to ensure that she had, and the musicality that Sharon speaks of. I mean, my daughter was even a part of that ensemble at one point. And so thank you, because that's incredible. And teachers and head teachers like Alex, who drive students. You know, those are the kinds of teachers that Anissa had. But in and amongst that, you know, something that Stephen said really resonated with me, and it really clicked, because my daughter was not willing to fail. She was just not prepared to fail. And that was it. So I think that linked in with the whole aspirational aspect. And I think we need to draw the threads together of everything that we've been talking about tonight, and do this for the children. You know, we have that saying, you know, well, with the late Whitney Houston, she sang it, I'm not going to sing tonight. But the words that she said were, I believe the children are our future. You know, and they are. So in the Lunar Society is very much one of our ethos is heritage for the future. And we build upon that heritage. And we, as the advantaged, are in the perfect place in a heritage perspective to be supporting children for the future. So thank you very much to all the panelists, and certainly to Colin, who has been an excellent chair tonight. I think we can all agree. I would actually ask you all to unmute so the panelists and Colin can actually hear the way that you feel about them. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. And yeah. And lastly, I would love to invite you to our next Futures event, which is going to be chaired by our Vice Chair, Peter Borg-Bartolo. He's going to be hosting the event that evening. He's waving to everyone. And it will be chaired by Richard Kirby. So we're going to look at aging well. And as somebody who is clearly aging well, I'm going to be very interested to find out more about how I can be even more enhanced in the way that I age in Birmingham, despite COVID. And we are having an incredibly exciting event on the 18th of February. And this is where we are going to be hosting a gentleman named Anton Chenkin, and he's written a book related to Benjamin Franklin, who was a great friend of the Lunar Society. And we will be discussing America's fight for universal progress and the links to the Lunar Society. And in the light of the recent US presidential inauguration, the storming on Capitol Hill, the very clear focus on democracy in America, I think this is actually an event that should not be missed. And lastly, I know that every single person on this call tonight enjoyed the discussion, the debate. If you want more of this, join us. It is truly, it's such a wonderful and rich environment for us to be in, and for us to be able to just move and catalyze action within this society. This is who we are. This is what we do. This is where we're going. So I really, truly would love to see all of you with us on this journey as we just continue making change and making waves for Birmingham and for the rest of the world. So with that being said, I am going to go to my kitchen now, and I'm going to make myself a cup of chamomile tea like I do. And I wish you all a wonderful journey to your sitting rooms or to your kitchens or to wherever it is that you're going to go now. And thank you so much for joining us tonight, and bless you all. Bye-bye.
Well done. Excellent meeting.
Thank you, Clive, and thank you for your wonderful contributions as always.
Did you notice that we had Caroline Cadbury online at one stage?
I did. She sent me a little private message to say hello.
Is she the Caroline Cadbury of the Cadbury family?
She is. She's at Bourneville. She's lovely. She's recently joined us as well as a member.
That was really interesting and really good.
It was, yeah.
It was. It really was. It really was. It was fantastic, fantastic. So we need to maximize this.
Yeah, if I'd had an opportunity and there was just too many questions, I was thinking along the lines of trying to mention Sir Adrian and how he led the way for these sorts of debates on a business level, but there just wasn't an opportunity because I've never seen so much chat. It was absolutely incredible.
And actually some really good content as well, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, look, I have to go to the kitchen and make myself a supper, which is going to be sad.